Fantastic. So with that, let's take a look at our speakers and who we do have here for you today. First up, I would like to introduce you to Amy Neale, who's the Senior Vice President of StartPath and Fintech at MasterCard. StartPath is MasterCard's global startup engagement program. The program accelerated more than 200 startups already. It was awarded as the Best Innovation Program in 2020 and recognized by the European Commission as one of the top corporates to work with startups. Amy has a PhD from Cardiff University and is really passionate about making sure that the world of technology is fully inclusive to everyone. Amy, it is a real pleasure to have you here today. Thank you for joining us. Our second speaker for today is going to be Charles Beyrouthy. Charles Beyrouthy is the head of digital innovation at Citizens Bank. And Citizens Bank is a company that joined the plug-and-play ecosystem in 2018. And the bank has been an incredible partner since day one. Their team is very involved in the ecosystem as they are really consistently looking for new technology solutions to really power and accelerate their internal strategy. Over the course of the last 2 years, I've been working really closely with Charles, and I know Charles is a founder and an entrepreneur himself. And by partnering with the fintech players, Charles really helps the bank to execute at a greater speed and become an innovation leader. Charles, it is an absolute pleasure to have you here this morning. Thank you for joining us. Great, I'm so excited for this conversation. So without any further ado, I will hand it over to Amy. Amy, what is StartPath and why is it so important in enabling the startup relationships with MasterCard as well as MasterCard's customers?
So thank you so much, Nadine. Thanks for the opportunity to join the session today. Delighted to share some thoughts and also to learn myself. So StartPath is MasterCard's startup engagement initiative. We've been up and running for about 6 years now. And our goal is to source the best and brightest later stage companies from right across the globe. Companies who already have a product in the market, have raised maybe first 1 or 2 rounds of investment and are really focused on scale. And the way that we work with those companies is through a dedicated 6-month program. We engage them with colleagues right across MasterCard's business with a goal of looking for opportunities to collaborate together on a bunch of different types of projects. And then we also have a network of MasterCard customers across the globe that we work with as well through the StartPath program. And I guess the way that we view our work is the creation of an ecosystem of innovators in financial services. We've worked with about 200 companies, I think, as you said, Nadine. Those companies have gone on to raise about $2.6 billion in capital after the program. So we're pretty proud that we've got some super fintech companies in the mix there. And delighted to share more detail with anybody who's on the webinar today if they'd like to hear more.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amy. I'm glad you are on the call and you were able to join us today. Charles, you are a founder and an entrepreneur yourself. How has your background helped you in your current role and what are you most focused on right now?
Really appreciate it, Nadine, and thanks a lot for having me. So I think as I've been talking about previously, in in a variety of different forums or thought leadership areas, we've been talking about how to make startups better companies. And when they come to Citizens, that's exactly our goal, whether it be working with our lines of business or working with our innovation groups. We really want to think about how to make them a much better startup. And so from a background, from my perspective, right, having been in a startup, having been in that position, right, there are a lot of different facets that a founder faces and challenges in terms of being able to grow their startup and make it successful. And having been on both sides of it, I'm able to provide some of that mentorships, that guidance, and that assistance to those startups, having been there and able to empathize with the challenges that they have today. And with that, we're able to, as a team, be able to provide them a much better guidance set than just being able to say, look, we're going to work with you as a corporate. We're actually able to provide them another perspective.
Wonderful. And I've seen this firsthand working with you, Charles. You're doing a wonderful job being a mentor for a lot of our startups. So as so many of us, I'm sure you're following the news closely, and a lot of the things are happening across every single industry every day, right? In finance specifically, we see a lot of small businesses applying for loans. And this morning, I just read that more than half of the Americans are now using contactless payments. Amy and Charles, from your point of view, what's the impact COVID-19 has on the financial industry as a whole?
So, Amy, you can start.
Thanks, Charles. I'll jump in. So, if I was to give my top thoughts around the impact on financial services, I think the one thing that we're keenly aware of is the drive to digital. Digital in the context of financial services has been a topic on the top of everyone's minds for several years now, with lots of FIs contemplating their digital experiences, standing up new solutions, new interfaces for consumers that are driven through digital, driven through mobile. But, of course, through COVID, that's made real today. Suddenly, there is no alternative. There is no branch to walk into. And therefore, I think that what's exciting actually is that the opportunity to speed up and accelerate digital is really with us today. And I think, for me, what I'm seeing is that the conversation is not just about front end, but it is about back end as well, that systems, legacy systems are now, we've always talked about legacy systems in financial services, but now there's a real opportunity to gather some momentum around change in that sense. Your point around contactless is spot on. Contactless is a digital payment experience, and it's definitely accelerating. And some of the work that MasterCard's been doing in the space suggests that that's not just for COVID, that actually consumers are saying that they have now converted to contactless and will stay. They view contactless as a cleaner way to pay, and they'll stay with it post-pandemic. So that for me is, every cloud has a silver lining. It's certainly been a big cloud, but the drive to digital would be a silver lining for me.
Sounds like it's definitely going to have a very lasting impact. Charles, what are your thoughts on the impact of COVID on the industry as a whole?
Well, absolutely. So I think one of the things that COVID has done is it's provided an exposition of where financial services firms in general have areas to improve in terms of their customer service, as well as the way in which they are going digital today. And it's done so in a very public way, unfortunately for many firms, but it's also been a call to action. I think many firms today are reevaluating their strategies around how they are handling the nature of the work that they are doing in digital, and they are reevaluating priorities, right? And I think from that perspective, it's also, it's sort of had a ripple effect on not only how we are prioritizing capability, but how we're prioritizing the infrastructure that we have at the bank. I think Citizens has been doing a great job in terms of its digital transformation efforts and some of the work that it's been doing with, colleague enhancement, as well as the response with our customers, right? But I think from the perspective of the financial industry in general, there are going to be a lot of discussions and a lot of boardrooms into how can we become more digital faster, especially for the longer term.
Wonderful. All of these are really good points, and actually make me exciting working in the field of innovation. And I know both of you are really on the forefront of innovation. Amy, how is MasterCard aligning as a response to COVID-19?
Yeah, so for MasterCard, we think about the response as a series of phases, from stabilization through normalization through and then ultimately through to growth. I think we've been through the containment period. What we understand as a global company is that those phases will look differently in different parts of the world. And then in terms of how we think about our role, we've been stepping in to provide solutions where we can, both to our customer base, to the banks and the merchants who are who we serve. But then we've also been trying to play our part in the world of the consumer, the end recipient, the end user. Our Center for Inclusive Growth has been very, very active in a number of parts of the world in how we think about our response. So that's kind of the sort of the general approach that we're taking to COVID.
Wonderful. And Charles, how is it looking for Citizens Bank? How did Citizens Bank adjust as a response to COVID-19? What are some of the things you put in place?
Apologies, especially from the perspective of when you look at initiatives such as the Payroll Protection Program, as well as a variety of different initiatives around small business lending, and even from a consumer base, right, with the recent stimulus injections by the U.S. Treasury for individuals and families. There has been a lot of technical adjustment required at the bank in order to really bring these programs together. Citizens is pleased to announce that we processed over $4 billion worth of loans in the Payroll Protection Program. So that's been an amazing opportunity for both our colleagues, but also for the many small businesses that we are servicing. But again, that comes at an immense cost, and we've had to work with fintechs. We've had to work with different startups. We've also had to work with some of our existing corporate vendors who are across the enterprise to be able to make some of those adjustments happen. And so with that, it's really, once again, a call to action, but also a call to prioritization, right? Thinking about what is the nice to have versus what is the business critical. That has been a consistent conversation. And I think for many startups, as they're starting to talk to these different banks, and especially in the coming months and even potentially next few years, where are you positioned, right, within the organization, and how are you positioned as a priority? Can you reposition your company to be a business critical solution versus a nice to have? And I think that's going to be essential for many firms coming up, especially in the next couple of years.
Awesome. And Charles, a good point that you made is it's actually leading very well to the next question I have for you. It's like, how should startups position themselves to really attract new customers right now?
Right. So, I think there's been so let's see what people are doing today, and then we can talk a little bit about what they've also been, what they could do. I think a lot of firms have been trying to position themselves as what we would call COVID-19 friendly. So some of them have been trying to, reposition their product or provide additional capabilities. And for some firms, that is an exceedingly successful strategy. I think some firms have done very well to be able to do that. With some companies, they just can't do that, right? So what they have been trying to do is reposition the revenue strategy, right? So the question is, can there, versus it being a customer experience exclusive platform, can there be a revenue aspect to how they can help bring in additional revenue to the bank? That has been something we've been trying to also talk to our companies and say, can you, where do you see that positioning today? Additionally, I would say that for many firms, right, our proof of concept pool has also changed, right? So I think that we've been trying to encourage our startups to go through a process called POC Light. In other words, what that means is trying to find a path of least resistance for a proof of concept, being able to find something that doesn't require basically very few capital resources, but also allows them to get to the top of the list, for post-COVID. So I would just say, just as a general point, take a look at your strategic plan and reevaluate where you are in the market today with the market dynamics that are happening.
Awesome. A lot of really good points that you made. Thank you, Charles. And Amy, I know MasterCard has been accelerating more than 200 companies. So from your point of view, how can startups create new relationships or really accelerate the relationships that they have currently in place with existing partners to hopefully land a deal with corporates?
Yeah, so, you know, we've worked with a number of companies that we've built relationships with through the StartPath program over the last while. And I think during this time, that it's been a very interesting opportunity to engage with those companies. Purposeful leadership, stakeholder capitalism, those things have really come to the fore. And the result of that has meant that what I have witnessed is an openness to partnership in ways that perhaps, you know, might have been slightly more challenged or on longer timeframes prior to the crisis. So, you know, for us, for our existing relationships, we've been evaluating those relationships and looking for where there is opportunity to collaborate together. We've had some fantastic projects that we've been able to stand up as a result of that with that existing portfolio. So my advice around that, I guess, is, you know, take a look at not just your sales pipeline, but those other relationships that you have, and think about ways that those relationships could be reinvigorated right now. I think that corporates are very open to sort of flattening the process a little bit in terms of engagement and reinvigorating relationships. You know, knocking on the door looking for budget or investment, that might not be the most fruitful in today's environment, but, you know, working together, collaborating together and thinking about what longer term opportunities could be is a great way of working with your established partners or your established relationships right now. We did a joint go-to-market in LA for the city of LA around a donation solution. So City of LA wanted to create a project to allow citizens to give easily, and Good World, which is a StartPath company, has a platform to allow giving through social media. So we brought them into the mix in terms of the proposition that we were building out. Tied that to MasterCard donations platform and a prepaid card for the disbursements of those donations. And, you know, that was possible in a period of 8 days because of the existing relationships. New relationships may be slightly more challenging at this stage. And that's why I would encourage people to look at, you know, who is in the Rolodex where you've got those existing engagements, those existing relationships that you can draw upon in creative ways.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amy. That's a great story with the startup from LA and what you were really able to pulling off with them. Congratulations on the success. Charles, I know Citizens Bank is really utilizing startup partnerships to stay on the forefront of the change. What are some of the barriers that you have experienced with working with startups? And what is some advice that you can give to startups and how to overcome these barriers? Startups as well as other corporate partners, if you would have advice, what would you say?
Yeah, so I'll answer this in two parts. So obviously you have the corporate side first that I'll go with. I would say that we've done a pretty good job of having a pretty streamlined procurement compliance and technical evaluation process for a lot of these firms. So even in COVID-19, we have an expedited process for firms that would be considered business critical, right? So we could definitely work with a startup that, if we deemed it an absolute necessity, to undergo some of those expedited protocols. And that goes for our compliance and technical technical resource teams as well. Now, from a startup's perspective, this is where it depends. I think there are firms that, lack of a better term, have their house in order, and some that don't. And I think we've done in the past is we've spent quite a bit of time with our startups and saying, okay, do you have this? Do you have that? Do you have, for example, do you have your SOC 1, Type 1, and Type 2 documentation? Do you have any way to be able to secure the data that we are giving you? Simple questions like that. And walking through some of those with the startups today, I would say with the extended sales cycles, in most cases, I think some startups would claim that they have shorter sales cycles, but with the extended sales cycles, it would be a great idea for many folks to take a look at, again, what are their internals, should they be doing in terms of getting their house in order and making sure that when the time comes that procurement, risk, and compliance are going to start evaluating the firm, that all of these things are in place. And that really comes into talking about how the startup is structured and how the startup is built. One other point I would just mention in terms of capital, and I know we'll probably touch on this later, but capital is going to be key for a lot of teams, right? We are going to be seeing some firms not being able to perform due to lack of capital. We want to make sure that firms are well capitalized and well structured and well positioned when they are ready to work with the bank. And if that is something you're not at yet, try to figure out how to get there. And if there's a way we can help, we'd love to do that.
Wonderful. Do you have specific advice, Charles, on fundraising? What is your advice for startups that are currently looking to raise capital? Because, as you said, it's an important part of running a startup. You need to have capital.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll say it this way: there are a lot of great investors out there. Case in point, Plug and Play, right? Amazing firm, lots of great successes, right? But I would think overall, try and focus as far as today is concerned, right? There is going to be some consolidation where some VC firms are going to start thinking about reinvesting into their existing portfolio versus taking a risk on another startup. That may be the case, but for many teams, I've recommended that try and find a lead investor. If you have follow-on investors, great, talk to them. And then be able to ask them for help to find a lead investor. But lead investment, I think, is going to be very key to a lot of folks. But again, look to your accelerators, look to your partners. We've made a lot of VC references to teams. I think we've even referred a few startups to Plug and Play. So we're thrilled about that. And I think as far as we're concerned, just really try and focus on getting that lead investor, and that will try to instill some confidence into those follow-on investors going forward.
Awesome. Thank you, Charles. Thank you for sharing the insights. And Amy, I know you have a really good network of VCs and venture capital firms that you're working with too. What have you seen in terms of raising capital? What's the impact? What's advice that you have?
So, and if I look at the companies that we've worked with, I'm seeing rounds getting done. Obviously, there's a lot of term sheets that were agreed upon before the crisis, but they are going through. We've had some great examples with some of our companies in the last couple of months. And I was looking at some of the stats earlier today, in fact, and the deals for March and April are in okay shape, so from a fintech point of view. What we're hearing from the VCs that we're engaging is that those who've got their funds locked need to expend their capital. So they need to do deals. So I think that is important to know, right? That there are VCs that are active that want to invest. And then the other thing that we've actually been hearing is that the deal meetings have slowed down. So I think a lot of startup companies have gone back to their core, looking after their teams, thinking about what their day-to-day business is, making sure that they're executing on the customers that they have, and are maybe not prioritizing new VC meetings. And actually, a couple of the VCs that we've been speaking to are saying, it's almost like they think that we're closed for business. We still want to do those meetings. I think cold meetings is tougher. Relationships are just super important right now. So warm introductions, warm referrals, to me, seems to be key. We're very happy to do that. Great to hear that, Charles, you're seeing that as well. And, I think also, Nadine, from a plug and play point of view, more like ourselves, we're seeing our networks of VCs, of players in the ecosystem, working together and trying to make sure that we are supporting our startups through. We recognize it's a tough time. We recognize that capital is important. So, I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I think there is opportunity, but maybe you just need to make sure that you're pressing on the warm introductions.
Awesome. Thank you. And
Actually, you said something really interesting there, which I think that's really good, is that a lot of the startups are actually going back to their core. I think that's a really great thing. I mean, especially if they, you're correct. I mean, the deal flow has dropped somewhat, right? But it's really great to know that the startups are not sitting idly. They're going back to their teams. They're going back to their core and trying to figure out how they can really get through the crisis beyond just taking capital, which I think is great.
Well, actually, I might add something. So the other thing that I think is really interesting at this time is, fintech entrepreneurs start businesses because they have a passion and a mission, and this is the time to peg tightly to that passion and that mission, right? Like, it's a really interesting time to kind of remember why you're doing what you're doing, because out of the crisis is where creativity and innovation comes. I think that there's going to be interesting opportunity down the line. Yeah, agree with you. What is the core? What is the reason you did this in the first place? Yeah.
Awesome. And I love the focus of like going back to the core, knowing why you're doing this. And we have seen some startups that, and I think, Amy, you were touching on this a little bit. We have seen some startups that are currently extending free, discounted, or accelerated deployment offers to financial institutions. In terms of POCs, does offering a free POC or actually reducing the price of a POC increase the chances to land an engagement with a bank or with a financial institution in general?
So yes and no. I think so. There's been a general precedence, right, with a lot of teams to say, and I've heard this so many times: do not do a POC with a bank or with a financial institution unless they are paying you. Have some stake in the game. Now, again, I've said this to a few folks already. Take a look at the stock market. And ask, and look at the capitalization tables of every bank in America, or even globally. How many banks really have what you would call free capital today, right? It's very few of them. Many banks right now are trying to also avert risk in terms of potential defaults that might happen as a result of COVID-19, as well as, trying to deal with certain debt mechanisms. So the idea has to be where does, what's going to do the best good for you in the longer term. If you're saying you're looking for a paid POC, that may be what's required, but the probability of you getting one right now, if the process hadn't started already, is going to be very low. If you are talking about saying, okay, well, and I alluded to this earlier, the POC light model, where it allows sort of a free proof of concept to be done, some testing to be done, but without the expenditure of a production environment or an environment that is very difficult to stand up, that allows for a few different proof points, which can get a process started. And even though it might be a longer process today in most cases, it'll still get people engaged enough in this time when there isn't enough time to deal with things that are essential. Alternatively, if this is a product that could potentially work with initiatives like the PPP, like COVID-19, like others, then we're talking about something that it's a low risk, low expenditure way to get into the door and get stakeholders involved. So my take to everyone, really try to evaluate your POC process and understand whether or not you really should be or could be charging for these POCs. And if there is a more effective way to do it, look at it.
Awesome.
Yeah, I agree with you, Charles. I think the other important thing to recognize is it's not one size fits all. There has been a lot of dialogue around the fact that fintechs and startup companies shouldn't offer free POCs. I just think that if you take that as blanket advice, you may be shooting yourself in the foot. I've seen a bunch of companies get really fantastic deals down the line on the back of running a free POC. And I've seen other companies who demand a paid POC having corporates walk away from them and losing the opportunity. So I think you've got to assess, what is the purpose of your POC? Is your POC part of your sales process, or is it part of your implementation with a customer? If it's part of your sales process, the idea that you're actually going to get funding for that right now, I think is going to be challenging. And if actually what you need to do with a POC is prove the efficacy of your solution, you know, that's not going to be paid for. That's part of your sales process. For me, very similar to Charles, I think that what startups need to do is have a very clear understanding of what their POC plan is, share that with a customer, and a POC plan should incorporate, you know, we talk about minimum viable pilots. It should incorporate all of the things that you need to demonstrate that are going to be proof of value for the company who's paying for your services down the line. That's both technical feasibility, but that's also, you know, a demonstration of the desire of the solution by conducting a survey of the users or whatever that might be. You know, having a very clear POC plan that you can share with your prospective customer and going through that with them so that they can understand whether it ought to be paid for or not. If it's going to be a 6-month pilot and you've got 10 engineers working on it, that's a different story to something like the fast track POC that Charles referred to. So horses for courses and be pragmatic.
Awesome. Thank you both of you, like really good points, really good insight. So thank you for being honest and sharing all of this with us. You know, in history, we have weathered a broad range of global challenges, and while there's never a playbook, what are some of the things that startups should be doing right now to really make the best use of the time and the resources that they have?
So in terms of making the best use of time and resource that they have, I think it's time to really reassess what your focus is and what your team's focus is. You know, everyone's saying it's not business as usual right now, but actually for a startup, it's never business as usual. Every day is a different day. You're always learning, you're always iterating. If I think about what you should be prioritizing, I've seen great examples of companies going back to the engineering team and saying, you know, we're not going to have a massive sales pipeline that we need to execute against an influx of customers, but we still want to maintain, we have capital, we want to maintain our engineering team. Let's focus on some innovative projects that we've had on the back burner. Let's be creative around what we can think about in terms of the product roadmap at this time. And I think that that's really sensible advice. The other thing that I think is super important is, you know, recognizing that sales is both an art and a science. And right now it's a bit more about art than it is science. So pummeling a pipeline in the way that you might normally in order to get conversions might not be the way to go, but actually thinking creatively about how you rely a little bit more on the marketing side of the house as opposed to purely sales is also a good thing to do if you're thinking about how you prioritize across the teams and how you prioritize resources, just as a couple of, you know, things that I've seen work well with startups that we've been engaging with. Yeah.
Amy, and you touched on marketing and communication. Have you seen any examples of startups that really have used successfully or that really adapted successfully their PR and marketing strategy towards COVID-19?
Well, so Charles spoke earlier about companies that have the ability to sort of pivot solutions in response to COVID. I think he called them, are they COVID responding companies? So we have seen some companies who've really thought about what they can stand up in the current environment and use that as a communications and marketing tool, which I think is absolutely to be admired. You know, a Brazilian ID verification company that's doing ID verification for KYC and AML is actually bringing that to bear for telemedicine to be able to verify whether a doctor is a doctor so that that doctor can deliver telemedicine solutions. You know, that's brilliant. It's a fantastic idea. So yes, I have seen different approaches from a comms and PR point of view. The other thing that I've seen is, you know, that speaking about the art of sales is we've talked about relying on your relationships, building out those relationships. I've had a startup company who I haven't spoken to for maybe 6-9 months reach out to me and give me their list of top 5 podcasts to listen to right now, reestablished the connection, made me smile, gave me something different to think about, caused me to think about their solution, caused me to think about who I could make introductions to. So yeah, I think it is a time to think about, you know, how you're communicating and what you're putting out there, what the face of the company is that you're putting out there.
Awesome. And, you know, Amy, when we are talking to our corporate partners, it's similar to what you're saying. We see that quite a few financial institutions are even accelerating the partnerships that they have with startups. Both of you, what do you think, how is COVID-19 really affecting the mergers and acquisitions as well as partnership opportunities that we have? Charles, you want to go first?
Yeah, so I would say that so the valuations have dropped, right? I think for many different firms, and I would say for this, especially technology firms that are looking at investing in fintech, this has presented an opportunity. So BCG posted a list of about 50 firms that are investing in fintech. Out of those firms, only 5 of them are banks. So these are the top 50 firms, and 45 of them are not banks or financial institutions. So, and it's surprising because I think for many firms, right, they're outside of their own vertical, but they're looking at it and saying areas like payments, like financial services, are going to be an essential part of what we are going to be looking at as our future roadmap. So that has led to some acquisitions, that has led to some mergers, that has led to some technology transfer initiatives. And I think that's going to continue. I think for many companies today, the new technology space is a steal, right? There are a lot of good opportunities out there. We're going to be looking at a very different landscape going forward after COVID is complete, right? I think after, there is a vaccine and things are back to 100%, we will be looking at a very different world. Now, that being also said, I would say that for many firms, right, this is going to be an opportunity, again, to reposition themselves. So strategically, if they've had an exit strategy, which could have been, we may be getting acquired by this firm, or we may be looking at this partnership or whatnot, these things may adjust and may change, but it also, with that, provides a new opportunity for the startup to look at itself in a very different light. So with that, I'm pretty optimistic about how startups are going to react to this. I believe that startups, better than most, are going to react very well, and they're going to be able to be malleable where many firms are not. But I would say that, again, being strategic and being thoughtful about the approach and communicating with your VCs, with your advisors, with thought leaders inside of your firm is going to be a crucial element of how successful you are in navigating the environment.
That's fantastic. Amy, how do you feel about mergers and acquisitions or partnerships?
So I think before the crisis, the world of acquisition in fintech was a very exciting place. There was an awful lot going on, which suggests to me that companies are thinking about partnership strategies in very new ways as it relates to fintech. From a startup point of view, I think, startup entrepreneurs, we've talked about the nature of entrepreneurs through this call already, but the nature of entrepreneurs is that they're sitting there and ready and waiting for when opportunity drops. And now is a time to be thinking in an opportunistic manner. But I think that, from a practical advice point of view, assessing what it is that you're building and what value that has in the world and to potential acquirers is a really sensible thing to be doing. Is it the team? So have you built out a team that has specialist capabilities that are hard to find elsewhere? Is it the IP? Have you got technology that's completely defensible with a robust moat? What is it, the business model and the scale that you've achieved? What is it that is going to be something that provides you with that exit opportunity? And then also thinking about how exits might look different. Really interesting point by Charles there about the fact that, it might not be the traditional acquirers that you'll be looking at, could be very different. And actually the other thing, in terms of entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs really understand their position in an ecosystem, and they understand how to navigate that ecosystem. So figuring that out and thinking that through, not just in terms of customers, but in terms of your broader landscape, I think is really important.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you so much, Charles. And with that, I would like to open it up to some questions from our audience. So there have been a lot of really, really good questions. So to our audience, because we're running a little bit out of time, if we didn't get to answer one of your questions, please feel free to reach out to us to use the email address fintech@pnptc.com and we'll get back to you. So one of the questions that we've had was around, have there been any unexpected learnings that you or your team encountered in the current moment that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, I can take a shot at this. So I think one of the biggest learnings I think we've seen has been how the financial industry has been able to react to the uncertainty of COVID. I mean, I think a lot of firms, especially with the fact that many folks are working from home, working remotely, and haven't been able to necessarily go to their bank, right? How do they conduct their banking today? How do they conduct their day-to-day transactions? How are they working through different mechanisms of even being able to, for example, pay their mortgage or use their credit card, right? These are a variety of different ways in which we've had to reevaluate how customers are treating their relationship with their bank. And so that has been an exceptionally thoughtful process, and I think many lines of business across the board have been trying to figure out how do we get closer to our customers in this time of lack of a better term, crisis, right? How do we get closer to them and be there when they need us for whatever they need us for? So that, I think, is going to be a huge takeaway for many financial institutions. And I think it's going to really change the nature of how we engage customers digitally in the future.
Absolutely. Awesome. With that, so look, we're gonna hop into a suite of really interesting startup presentations. But before we do that, I want to thank both of you for spending the time with us this morning, for joining us. Thank you very much, Amy. Thank you very much, Charles. This was absolutely stimulating. And with that, I would like to hand it over back to my colleague, Mona, who will introduce the startups to you.